It's a Thursday here on Jasiri, and today we're focusing on two conversations that, on the surface, may seem different, but at their core, they're both about systems, accountability, and the impact of policy on everyday lives. First, an update on the story of a woman who passed away after a pair of surgical scissors were left in her stomach. From medical negligence to misdiagnosis to delayed treatment, why do Nigerians continue to suffer at the hands of those meant to treat and preserve their lives? Then we'll zoom out to the bigger picture with PwC Nigeria Economic Outlook for January 2026. We'll unpack what recent macroeconomic reforms mean for businesses, investment, and growth, and why economic performance matters, not just for markets and policymakers, but for jobs, incomes, and Nigerians. Two conversations, one common thread: how decisions, systems, and oversight shape real outcomes.
We're starting with a story that is painful, disturbing, and honestly terrifying. Imagine going into a hospital for a routine medical procedure and leaving with a pair of surgical scissors inside your stomach. This is the story of Aishatu Umar, a mother of 5, who for months complained about severe abdominal pains following surgery carried out at the Abubakar Imam Urology Center, a government hospital in Kano State. She is said to have died on Sunday while undergoing corrective surgery to remove the scissors, which were said to have been forgotten in her body during an earlier operation at the facility. Abubakar Muhammad, a relative of the deceased, alleged that despite repeatedly returning to the hospital to complain of worsening pain, she was only given pain relief medication without further investigation.
In an update, the Kano State Hospital's Management Board has suspended 3 medical personnel at the Abubakar Imam Urology Center after confirming that surgical scissors were indeed left inside her. And according to the board, a preliminary investigation ordered by the Executive Secretary, Dr. Mansour Mudi Naguda, confirmed that the scissors were forgotten in her stomach after a procedure carried out in September 2025. The incident only came to public attention after her family shared her story online, triggering widespread outrage and calls for accountability. Now, the state government says the matter has been referred to the Kano State Medical Ethics Committee for further investigation and possibly disciplinary action as well, while the suspended personnel have also been barred from clinical duties.
And you can see the statement on your screen from the Kano State Management Board, and they said that in line with its commitment to accountability, professionalism, and patient safety, the board has outrightly suspended 3 personnel directly involved in the case from clinical activities with immediate effect. Furthermore, the matter has been formally referred to the Kano State Medical Ethical Committee for further investigation and appropriate disciplinary action in accordance with existing laws, professional guidance, guidelines and ethical standards as well. They condoled with the family and reassured the public that it would not condone negligence in any form and will continue to take decisive actions to safeguard the lives, dignity, and trust of patients across all state health facilities. Let's take a look at some of the reactions. This story has been developing since it broke over the weekend, and now this update. Dear Kano State Governor, it's not just about suspending them. Our medical elders ready to drop their egos and, quotes, it must be done my way, unquotes, and quotes, Professor, this does surgery this way, you must do it this way, end quotes. Are we ready to develop national surgical guidelines for Nigeria in all specialties? Are we ready? And this person has doctor, and I think maybe they've seen 1 or 2 things. Yeah. The level of negligence that is rooted in Nigeria's system from top to bottom, it's really something to be worried about. The problem is inadequate staffing and quackery. For a surgery to commence, a surgeon and an operative nurse must be there and other team members. Had it been a specialized nurse is there, he or she will know the equipment are not complete.
Exactly.
God. This raises serious questions about medical training, supervision, and malpractice accountability in Kano. How many more cases like this go unreported? A digital surgical tray that triggers a mild alarm when instruments are missing on the tray, weight-based, would solve this problem. Will someone build this to save lives? Will those arrogant doctors buy it? Is it the doctors? What happens to the life that was lost? Will the suspension bring her life back? And so on the point of suspension, that might be what the guidelines say.
Yes.
I know people want us to move directly to a trial and hang them and just, and you know, but there are even guidelines. We spoke about it yesterday, how very difficult it is to even withdraw a doctor's license. So there are guidelines and even how the state likely has to approach this. And it's not just Kano. And do we know, and you know, I talk about this thing, we don't like doing autopsies. Do we know how many people have passed away with maybe possibly medical instruments in their bodies, or because they've been given overdoses, but they were able to leave the hospital and they passed away maybe a month later? And we don't do autopsies because and then we don't know the causes of so many deaths. This is
just like
it's ridiculous.
You know, at least I know that a trained nurse, sometimes it's about the staff you have. You know that there's a surgical tray. The nurse in the surgery must count the equipment
even if you're using your eye to count it.
There are ways that doctors do these things. At least even if I don't know anything about medical practice, I've seen it done in a video, in a YouTube. They will ask for an equipment, they will hand it to another nurse to put on another tray as used. And you know, because they sterilize this equipment. You know, sometimes we're wondering that when do we begin to make people accountable for their actions? Because nobody's head rolls for something. Everybody can just do anything as they like. We're talking, see now, she's gone.
She has 5 children.
5 children. Her husband is a widower now, motherless, and this is an avoidable death. And I don't know why in Nigeria, when you make complaints, why don't they do the investigation that needs to be done? Just like my mother when she was ill. The man said she didn't know if we could afford the equipment. Did you put it on the table as an option? And the family said no. So if somebody says they have abdominal pain and they come over and over again, why can't you just do a scan? A scan would have revealed this immediately.
I think it's a good thing and it's a step in the right direction that social media, at least, you know, sometimes we talk about social media as negative when you walk through the streets of social media, but sometimes in these lights,
this is what social media was made for.
Social media has been good in this sense, and people are now opening up and speaking out more. This is in Kano State. In one of the reactions when someone said, oh, you know, in Kano, this and that. And I'm thinking it's not a Kano thing, it's a Nigerian thing.
Exactly.
It can happen anywhere. Do you know the number of deaths that could have been avoided if attention was paid and if care was taken to make sure that before you send a patient out into recovery, check and balance that everything is sorted. But now we have the fact that the 3 people have been suspended. People say it's a step in the right direction. Okay. I know that all of us want to run, you know, want to run to trial, we want to go to court, and we want actions, severe actions, consequences to be taken. Listen, there are processes, like Tolu says, there are processes involved in this. This is a step in the right direction, yes. Someone was saying that, why don't their licenses get revoked? Why don't they is suspension going to bring the person back?
No.
Those that I understand, these are emotions that are playing all about. But at the end of the day, we have to be prepared as citizens, as people. We have to have the duty to call for accountability. We don't do postmortems, and we don't do what do you call it?
I said autopsy.
Autopsies. We don't do autopsies enough. A lot of families don't call for autopsies. You just want to bury the dead and move on because it's what we do. The dead, you know, they've gone. Let us just mourn our loss and let us move on. But sometimes it is necessary for us to take it a step further to understand the repercussions and the gravity of the things that we do. There's a lot that is being veiled by hospitals. There's a lot, and they just, listen, bottom line, we have to take more accountability. We have to decide to call for more accountability as well. When I first saw the story, this is a woman who's a mother to 5 children. The children have lost their mother.
Forever.
The woman's husband has lost his wife. It's beyond what we're saying, that it's beyond all this, okay, yeah, but she said, God may her soul rest in peace. But it's beyond all of that, guys. We need to be accountable and call for accountability. It's bad enough that we say, oh, it has, you know, it's already done. Can she be brought back to life? No. Let's begin to change.
And I want to go back to what Lolo was talking about, and that's the point that this woman apparently for months, since the surgery in September, I think it was September last year,
she
had been complaining and going back. And the idea that so many of us, you'll go to hospital, and that's why we're going to do a show on the Patient's Bill of Rights in Nigeria. If you don't know, as a Nigerian citizen, you're entitled to certain rights when you're engaging with medical professionals and medical personnel. And so you're going back and forth. A woman is telling you that she's in pain. This is a woman that has given birth 5 times. So she knows pain. Yeah. She knows pain to a certain level. She knows, she understands her body. She's going back and telling you she's in pain, and you're giving her painkillers. You don't do a pelvic scan, you don't do an abdominal scan, you don't do whatever kind of thing you could have done. You didn't investigate further. And on that fact, her blood is on somebody's hands. Because a simple scan would have solved all of this. And at the end of the day, I think it's also a conversation about how dismissive some medical personnel are. We spoke about it earlier this week. And coming on the heels of the death of Chimamanda Adichie's son, and of course that whole conversation, people have been sharing online their stories of medical negligence. It is not just a wake-up call. It is a 5-fire alarm.
We even need the Medical Association to be very transparent about this, because sometimes they cover up on all the things that happen within that space. And I honestly understand that doctors need to be protected somehow, because if their lives are always probed and everything, it will make them, not maybe give their best at all times. But if they are honest in their assessment, and if somebody has some issues, do you know that in the world now, do you know doctors, they are amongst those that have drug issues?
Yes.
You will not believe it, that a medical personnel might have a full-blown drug crisis, that they need to withdraw the person from surgery or something. Maybe because they're absent-minded or hallucinating. Something is just not making them perform up to par. If they're very honest in their assessment, and even if everybody does not know, they just quietly investigate a doctor and just withdraw the person, I think it will do us a lot of good.
No, we can't be doing quiet investigations, Lola, and we have to go. No. We can't be doing quiet. People need to see justice being done. People need to see somebody being held accountable. Also in this situation, we don't just want one scapegoat. We don't want you to scapegoat somebody. Let the real person, the real culprits, go and face the law, go and face judgment. But Nigerians need to know that there are avenues in which they can demand accountability when it comes to medical professionals. You need to do more to educate Nigerians about their rights. You need to do more to educate Nigerians about the process in which they can complain. This was a government hospital. The Chimamanda situation was a private hospital. It's telling you that nowhere is safe.
Nowhere is safe. All right, when we started the show this morning, we said we had 2 conversations, and that was the first conversation. Now, the second conversation, we're examining Nigeria's economy, sending mixed signals, stability on one hand, uncertainty on the other. So when we return from this break, we'll move beyond the headlines to examine what PwC's Economic Outlook really means for businesses, investment decisions, and Nigeria's prospects of growth this year. Which sectors are positioned to grow? What risks remain? What policies, choices could make the difference? And all of that. Don't go anywhere. The conversation continues after the break with Akolawole Odunlami. He's Associate Director at PwC, and he joins the conversation. The outlook for 2026 is just getting started. Stay with us.
Thank you so much for staying with us right here on Jasiri. Now, before we get into our conversation, we do need to let you know that the Armed Forces Celebration Day is happening. An event to commemorate the Armed Forces Celebration Day is happening right now in Nigeria's capital, and that is in Abuja. We know that the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, is there today as this event is taking off. Now, the Armed Forces Celebration and Remembrance Day is observed annually on January the 15th, and it's a solemn national event honoring fallen military heroes from world wars, peacekeeping, and the Nigerian Civil War, which also celebrates the sacrifices and service of current armed forces personnel. Now, the date marks the end of the Nigerian Civil War in 1970 and involves wreath-laying, prayers, and ceremonies nationwide to recognize their courage, professionalism, and dedication to national security. With the recent name change, that means it went from Armed Forces Remembrance Day to Armed Forces Celebration Day to better reflect both celebration and remembrance. We'll keep an eye on this. As we told you, Vice President Kashim Shettima is there. You can see him on the screen. We will get to our conversation, but we'll continue to keep an eye out as the event unfolds today. Bolo?
All right, thank you very much for staying tuned. And this is still Jasiri, and we're about to have a very important conversation. 2025 was a year of significant macroeconomic adjustments, from exchange rate reforms and tighter monetary policy to fiscal changes aimed at restoring stability. While these measures helped address long-standing imbalances, they also reshaped the operating environment for businesses and investors. So today we're unpacking the key macroeconomic outcomes of 2025. What stabilized? What remains fragile? And which indicators now matter the most? We'll also look at how these conditions are playing out in the real economy, what they mean for business confidence, investment decisions, access to capital, and overall economic performance in 2026. The key question is not just whether stability has been achieved, but whether it is credible, sustainable, and strong enough to support growth in the year ahead. And we can't forget the jarring projection that 62% of Nigeria's population could be living below the poverty line this year. We have a lot to get to, so let's get to it. Joining us now is Akolawole Odunlami, the Associate Director at PwC. Very much welcome to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, Akolawole. So before we look ahead, it's important to understand where Nigeria is coming from, because last year was a year of adjustments, you know, from exchange rates reforms to tighter monetary policy. And PwC's outlooks review that these developments to assess what worked and what didn't, and which macroeconomic signals now matter as Nigerians enter 2026. So, from PwC's assessments, Kolawole, what can we say were the macroeconomic developments that will shape 2026, going into 2026? What were the developments last year that will shape this year?
Thank you once again for having me. 2025 was quite an interesting year for our country, and 2025 was the continuation of the 2023 economic reset that we faced as a nation. And the reset was necessary to lay the foundation for further economic growth in the future. And a lot happened. The fiscal reforms, the exchange rate stability that happened, coming from one more transparent discovery of prices for exchange rate, and also to reduction in arbitrage. If you observe last year, the gap between the official exchange rate and the parallel market has largely been closed, right? Not fully, there's still a gap, but that has reduced the room for arbitrage. And so exchange rates stabilized last year around largely 1,004 to 1,005, right? We also had inflation trending downward to 14.45% as of November. We had external reserves growing to $45.45 billion, which was good for the economy. We also had, you know, a lot of improvements in the economy in other areas. So that has laid the foundation for what we can expect in 2026.
So the things you list, if a lot of Nigerians are listening to you, it sounds like you have a lot of activity. A lot of things were happening last year. So in terms of the fiscal reforms, the exchange rates adjustments, the monetary tightening, all of that happened, how did they then overall affect economic stability for 2025? And the unfortunate thing is, if you do a timeline, they didn't necessarily all happen earlier in the year for us to get some really great results. They happened in different ways because as different actions were taken, different consequences were coming about. But overall, how did that affect economic stability in 2025?
Okay, so let's situate this first of all. Economic stability itself is largely when economic indicators are within predictable limits, right? And we're not experiencing sudden booms and busts, up and downs in economic indicators. And economic stability itself is not economic growth. But economic stability can or leads to economic growth. So what we've had last year was a situation where most fiscal variables, like exchange rates I mentioned, inflation, were largely within predictable limits. Same with even interest rates, largely within predictable limits. Excuse me. And what that does is when there is stability, first of all, you can plan, right? When there is stability as a business, you can price your service offerings because you're not expecting unnecessary shocks. Now, that stability gives confidence. Stability drives investment. Investment drives productivity, right? Productivity creates jobs. As jobs are created, jobs drive income. Household income, individual income. Income drives spending. When people have money, they can spend, right? The income also drives savings. Savings also drives investment, which then goes back to the same cycle. So it's cyclical, right? So the economic stability drives economic growth. The issue then is the transmission, right, from stability to growth. Not just growth, to inclusive and expansive, sustainable growth.
Wow. You know, last year, just as Tolu asked that question generally, we know that not every sector, you know, grew the same way. The sectors that didn't experience things like fiscal reforms and exchange rate adjustments, you know, not all of them experienced it the same way. Just like Tolu was saying, some came in the middle of the year, towards the end, so the indicators were a bit all over the place. Which sector would you say showed the most resilience, you know, despite the economic headwinds, and what explains their performance if they did well? And which sectors struggled?
Yes, the services sector did well.
What is the services sector? You need to make it plain.
Yes. I mean, services sector are sectors where largely you are offering intangible outputs. So like the banking sector, ICT, right? They did very well. Telecommunication sector also did well. Broadband penetration in Nigeria last year rose to cross the 50% band. So that sector was doing very well. The manufacturing sector still struggled a bit, right? Regardless of about $5 billion capital inflow into that sector, you still had, you know, access to credit or expensive credit, right? With monetary policy rates at 27%. That also affected their cost of borrowing. The agricultural sector could have done better, particularly due to value chain issues or supply chain issues, insecurity that affected even the farmers from farming, and of course affected, you know, transportation,
the value chain
logistics,
of food,
the value chain of food. So the service sector has done well, but manufacturing sector can do better. Agricultural sector also can do better.
Okay, because we know that macroeconomic numbers don't just exist in isolation. They influence business decision as well. Like, so going forward in this 2026, what does the outlook say about boosting confidence for businesses? Should businesses be more cautious, or, you know, should they be more optimistic?
Well, I think 2026 should come with more optimism. And as of December, the CBN's Business Expectation Index had shown that, you know, optimism from businesses in Nigeria had risen to about 37.5%. And it's expected that in 2026, that will go to maybe as high as 50%. The optimism is not just, won't just come out of patriotism, right? It will come from what the numbers tell. And largely, the numbers are telling a good story currently, right? Like I mentioned, the fiscal indicators are on the positive currently. So we expect people to be more optimistic, cautiously optimistic, because there are risks, of course, associated with the growth. So risk like external factors, external risk, geopolitical tensions, some of the
Donald Trump is a whole risk on his own.
Yeah, but I think on the geopolitical side, one thing is that the world is getting closer to a Russia-Ukraine deal. Now, Venezuela also. Now, a Russia-Ukraine deal could mean that Russian barrels that have not largely been allowed into the market will come
back into the international market.
Venezuelan barrels will possibly come legally into the market. Now, that would affect supply. Now, that affecting supply would bring the price of crude, which is the largest foreign exchange earner for Nigeria and a key driver of our foreign exchange, forex rates, right? So now, if that happens, oil prices will probably go way below what is in the budget.
We have pegged in the 2026 budget proposal.
Right, that could affect exchange rates.
All right,
and that would affect even how the whole budgets might eventually come to be.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. So you've mentioned the risk, which was the next question, but Kat is going to take us there.
Okay.
So Nigeria's economy may be stabilizing on paper, but somehow the poverty rate still tethers at 62%, and that happened this year. So with more than 140 million Nigerians living below the poverty line, the economic outlook for January this year paints a different picture. It paints a picture of conflicting realities and possibilities. We'll explore all of that when we come back. That 62% is what's on my mind. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
All right, this conversation is all-encompassing, but there is one part of it that has really stood out to many people. But before we get to that part, the follow-up question to what you have been speaking on about the optimism and being cautiously optimistic was to talk about the risk. You had mentioned a few of the risk as well. Is there any other thing we need to possibly, or businesses need to put at the front of their mind when it comes to the potential for risk, or even the current macroeconomic reforms that they may be able to leverage on for 2026?
Yes, I had mentioned earlier about the geopolitical issues.
Yeah.
Also, the stance on immigration, particularly the United States, could have an effect on us because diaspora remittance actually has been a very key driver of foreign exchange earning for us. And so in a situation where, those who want to, travel are not able to, right, or the people start getting, deported, as it were, that could affect us. And then there are also other risks. The issues with insecurity are being dealt with. We hope that they are consistently dealt with
and decisively
dealt with.
Yeah.
That if that risk is managed, then that could also help. And of course, also the risk of, and I think that risk is largely very little. Of being distracted or inconsistent in the policy push as we go into
elections. Imagine elections are a risk. Anyway, so let's now take time to look, to take a hard look at the economic reality facing millions of Nigerians. Now, while headlines are celebrating macroeconomic stability, slowing inflation, currency reforms, or even government fiscal measures, the average Nigerian is still struggling to make ends meet. Insights from the reports by PwC paint a stark picture. Nigeria's poverty rates could hit 62% this year, meaning more than 140 million people may be living below the poverty line. The report highlights that while macroeconomic indicators may show stability, the benefits are not reaching households, and warns that unless the country moves beyond stabilization towards inclusive, sustainable growth, the economic challenges will only deepen. Our guest is Akolawole Odunlami. I asked somebody recently that had they ever heard that name. You're the first.
Akolawole.
No, for me, no.
Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding.
Akolawole.
I've never heard that.
So our guest is Akolawole Odunlami. He's Associate Director at PwC, and he's still here with us to break it down. So those figures, we've had this conversation. It might seem to, you said at the break now, we're already at 61%. 61%. We might be going to 62%. In terms of this figure, that's 6 in 10. How alarming is it? And what does it tell us about the direction of the economy? So we're hearing good things, but Nigerians are not feeling good things.
Yes, so first of all, it's not an alarming jump in poverty rates, just to establish that. We are at about 60.1%. Thereabouts now, and we are going to see, well, possibly the projection is possibility of 62%, right? And that's because, like I mentioned earlier, we've had stability. We are going, economic growth is improving, but we need to get more to the point of inclusive and expansionary economic growth. Inclusive growth is growth that is broad-based, growth that creates jobs, growth that reduces the inequalities, and growth that all segments of the economy participates in and benefits from. And it's not a Nigerian thing, right? In economic theory, the Kuznets curve, talks about the fact that at a certain level, initial level of industrialization of growth, right, most of the growth, most of the job creation, industrializations happen mostly in the urban areas, right? And then in the rural areas, right, you may have some level of unemployment. But as growth deepens, right, you expect that curve to smoothen out, which means you bring more people are employed and all, right? So it's not just a Nigerian phenomenon, right? But for us, like I said, if the risk can be effectively managed. So for example, we have projected that the economy will grow at about 4.4%, right? That's interesting. But of course, we need to go back to the point of 6% plus growth because the population is growing at 3% on average. We need, we need economy to grow at least double, right, of the rate at which the population is growing, right? So, yeah, and of course, you still have, a large chunk of people in the rural population who are still living, around or below the poverty line. But of course, the improved minimum wage at 70,000 and a couple of other factors, maybe we may end up still staying at 61%.
And even with
61%.
Even with ASU's agreement as well, and the potential for some other agreements with some major unions might also,
help.
Yes, improve household income.
You've probably majorly maybe answered my own question, basically, because we're talking about this affecting more mainly the unemployed, because they're the ones that probably will feel it more. Because if you say Nigerians are sliding into poverty, we have two demographics. Sometimes we have to look at it from the employed and the unemployed population. So, or are we talking about people that are earning but just too little? Are they going to fall lower? Or are we seeing people that are on the unemployed range experience these decline too? Or is it mainly for those that are unemployed or those that are earning very little?
Yeah, I think we should look more on the positive side. Of course, those that are unemployed that may remain unemployed, definitely the poverty issue, will continue. People that are employed that may not be earning enough, right, and possibly. But the other side also is that in the rural areas, particularly people below poverty line, the largest chunk of their income goes into feeding. Goes into food, 70% thereabout, right? And that, of course, leaves little room for savings, But on the positive side again, right, there's a lot to look forward to in 2026, right, if the reforms are sustained, right? And, of course, we are also expecting that the monetary tightening stance of the central bank might be lightly eased. So interest rates should go down a little further as we expect that MPR goes down. Of course, we understand why the CBN has kept it
as tight as it is
because,
for a long time.
It helped to manage inflation, and not just inflation. It also helped to drive, investment, because your monetary policy rate sets the floor largely for returns. Right? It has helped to drive investment. It has helped to also drive foreign portfolio inflow. But we expect it to get, a little east in 2026 as if this inflationary trend continues.
All right. So let me just stay on Lola's question and just expand it a little bit. So I'm just going to ask you succinctly, let's just explain it succinctly, because from what the report shows, is poverty becoming more urban? I hear when you say, okay, listen, the most of the income the rural people in the rural area get, they spend it on feeding. So is it then safe to say that poverty is wearing a rural face? Or is it becoming more urban? Is it becoming more rural? Is it a melange of both, or is it more just widespread across the country?
No, poverty is still largely rural. Largely rural. Of course, we have largely rural in the sense that we have the largest portion of the poor people in the rural areas. Of course, there is urban poverty, but largely rural. But again, like I said, if we focus on the positives, if the reforms are sustained, and if the gains of the reforms come, there is a transmission mechanism between economic growth and economic development. And the challenge mostly with developing countries is that when they experience economic growth, it doesn't directly translate to development, or it takes time. Generally, in economic theory, right, there's a time lag between when the economy grows and when we begin to feel the impact. And we should expect that 2026, 2027 upward, there should be more translation, right, if the structural bottlenecks in between the translation is fixed.
And I think that's really important for people, because when you have these conversations, Nigerians will shake their heads and say, all this what you're saying. Now I'm still going to the market and it's expensive. I'm still buying bread for this much. I'm still paying all this much and only this little is left. So we need that economic translation in 2026 for Nigerians to really believe that the economic reforms are actually making sense. Let's look at businesses. So how does business performance also add that to investment decisions, translates into real outcomes for Nigerians in terms of jobs, incomes, and economic resilience? And why should ordinary citizens care? Because we have so many other things we care about. Why should ordinary citizens care about macroeconomic indicators?
Well, ordinary citizens should care because the macro affects the micro, right, in the long run. And again, like I mentioned, it's a cycle. When we have more investment, right, in productive sectors, more jobs will be created. More people will get employed. As more people get employed, they earn. As they earn, they are lifted out of poverty. Household income increases. They can spend. As they spend, they can also save, right? So it's a cycle. So you should be concerned because, for example, the monetary policy rate, which drives interest rates, is going to affect your cost of borrowing, right? Whether you are borrowing as an MSME, whatever channel you are borrowing from, right?
You'll feel it.
It's probably still going to be based on the pricing floor.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So you should be concerned because it drives your business also, right? Inflation affects your business. Exchange rates affects your business because regardless of what you're selling at the micro level, right, the inputs of whatever you may be selling, if it's imported, right, that importation drives, and if it's imported, definitely is FX based, right? It drives what you sell. It drives how you price what you sell, right? And it drives whether people can buy it or not. So now that it is improving, right, you should be concerned because the macro drives the micro.
And I was gonna laugh when he said that you should be concerned because you know.
Or maybe you should not. You should.
No, let me give you the example because we go to the market and they'll tell Catherine that the Wedu seller will tell her it's the price of dollars.
And then you look because you don't expect that response. You look in shock.
Yes, like, okay. So inflation is also psychological, right? And I'm going to answer your question, but there's something called inflation expectation. Right, which is not inflation itself, but can drive inflation. If people expect that going forward exchange rates will jump, they start panicking and start increasing prices. And as they do that drives inflation. So that's inflation expectation. But for the woman on the street, yes, she's selling Ewedu. Ewedu is locally produced. But what she's saying to you indirectly is, she's going to take that money, right, to go and buy something else. She's going to take that money to go and buy petrol. If you are in an economy that continues to import petrol, and petrol, the importation is dependent on exchange rates, dependent on crude oil prices, it's going to affect her. She will buy petrol for the generator in her house. So it's cyclical. What she's saying is not just the commodity, just the way that she sells it.
It sounds nice in the mouth to say. That's what happens.
And again, like I said, right, there's also a psychology around inflation. It's also it's psychological and it's monetary.
Let's keep going.
Very interesting.
That's where I'm going to take a pause for our last break. All right, so let's keep it moving. Let's look at the roles that macroeconomic policy choices play in determining growth, whether it's exclusive or it is inclusive. So what signals should the government send to ensure businesses grows businesses grow in ways that expand opportunity on the economy?
The first signal is consistency, right? People have to know consistency and transparency. The basis of your policy has to be transparent. People need to know what to expect. People need to know that the government is not going to wake up tomorrow and change things, abruptly. Yeah. That gives them confidence. Again, that helps them to be able to plan, right? So the consistency, the transparency would really help.
Yeah. I know this is a very important conversation because most of the time when you're talking economics, a lot of people forget that even the woman on the streets, she has her own local economics in her head. It might just not be translated, expertly as you are putting it. As we wrap up, we know that stability alone, because I know you've been saying government needs to be consistent, for business to grow. Nigeria must now shift from managing shocks, because that's what we're used to unlocking productivity and competitiveness. What must the government do differently to ensure that all these great reforms that you say have been ongoing since 2025, translate into real economic performance, indices that people can just hold in their hand? What are the key growth drivers, for Nigeria generally in this 2026? And how realistic are these drivers under this current condition, knowing fully well that, in Nigeria, nothing stays the same?
Oh la la.
Yes. Okay, so two things. One, there are soft issues that needs to be consistently dealt with, right? One of the positives of the tax reforms is that people who are living below certain income bands have been excluded, at least from income taxes, right? Because everybody is still going to pay tax. You are going to transfer. There's VAT. There are those transactional taxes. But from income taxes, you're excluded, which is a positive. And that also leaves more money in your pocket to spend, right? There are soft issues that need to continuously be addressed, right? Issues around security and issues around energy, right? Look, there is a bi-directional causality nexus between energy consumption and economic growth. So what that means is that the more energy you consume, it drives productivity and the economy grows. You need energy to drive. And the more you drive for productivity, the more you grow, the more energy
you need.
Right? Energy until you then get to the point of energy efficiency, where you consume less energy. Now, in this part of the world, right, energy is not just for, there are many uses of energy, right, but it's not just for electrification only. So, for example, if you talk about something like PMS, right, the average Nigerian can hardly live without interacting with PMS. Either you are using generator for your house, you're buying fuel to fuel your car, or if your grinding machine is using generator, it's using fuel, if that's the business you do, right? Unlike elsewhere where people hardly bother about the prices of white products because you can live without them. You hop on a train, you jump on a public bus, there's good supply of electricity, therefore you don't need to bother about buying fuels, right? And from our estimation, right, about if, for example, you solve the electricity issue, right, about 30% of the dependence on white products, PMS, diesel, is solved. Right, so those soft issues need to be addressed. Of course, as we go into 2026, as we expect further reforms in the power sector, that should be addressed. So those soft issues around security have to be addressed, and which they are being addressed already, right? And then, of course, communication. Communication. Like I mentioned, investment is both logical, is also psychological, because the investor, right, needs to have confidence. Also, for the average Nigerian also needs to have confidence. Inflation is monetary, but there's also a psychological part of inflation which needs to be addressed. So consistent communication, transparency, right, and letting people be able to understand, realize what is happening in terms of the reforms. largely those of us who are, educated seem to understand, but like you mentioned, the people on the street, a lot more needs to be done to
educate them, bring them on board even.
Let them understand and which, from the perspective of the tax reforms, a lot of that is being done actually, if you give due credit to the committee.
All right, so let me quickly ask how we can improve competitiveness to support exports. That's Nigeria as a country. How do we improve that competitiveness to support exports and reduce the vulnerability to external shocks? Because whether we like it or not, that happens. And then in the same vein, what role, I know you've talked about energy and all that, but let's ask if there's specific roles that infrastructure, energy, reliability, and logistics play in perhaps unlocking business growth.
Yeah. So I think from an export perspective, first of all, right, value creation, right, or value creation or improvement or value addition in our exports, right. We've said, over and again, right, you gain more when you export finished products than when you export raw materials largely, right. For example, for every barrel of crude you export, yes, you gain, but when you produce locally and then you export the products, you make more money, if I may say it in layman's terms. So we need to get the local value addition to work so that our exports can be priced premium, and we're not just exporting raw stuff. That's the first. Secondly, also is we need to fix some of which I've mentioned, the supply chain issues that can make our exports be priced uncompetitively. Right? And then, of course, issues around, customs and all, which largely have been fixed, but a lot more still needs to be done to ensure, those exports. And what was the second question again?
The roles that
infrastructure, energy, logistics.
All of that. What do they say to unlock growth?
Yes. So, look, first of all, in terms of infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is a bedrock of growth. And that's why we always say that construction is a time-tested job creation machine, right? Infrastructure supports development. When you invest in infrastructure, particularly things like road, for example.
You open places up.
You open places up. A lot of people,
cost might even go down.
The direct, indirect job creation, right, is huge, right? Like what is happening, for example, in the coastal road, opening of that environment, real estate value in those areas, right, will also improve, so that also helps economic growth, right? Because there's then a linkage to the sectors, right? The real estate sector grows, right? Job creation grows, and all. The best way to think about an economy is that an economy is cyclical, right? There's an ecosystem. Right, every action has a ripple effect around.
Let's even ask this.
We can't ask.
Hypothetically.
We will ask after the show. We will ask after the show. We can't ask this final question but it's an important question because if we don't get it right, what happens? If we get it right, what happens? But we have to ask that question after the show. Akolawole, thank you so much for joining us today.
We will get it right.
We hope. We're crossing fingers, toes, legs, everything. Fine. So as we've discussed, Nigeria is at a critical economic moment. The past year has been about adjustment and stabilization, difficult but necessary steps to correct long-standing imbalance. But as PwC's Economic Outlook makes clear, stability on its own is not the end goal. What matters now is what comes next, whether reforms translate into stronger business confidence, increased investment, higher productivity, and sustainable and inclusive growth that can support jobs and economic resilience in 2026 and beyond. The choices made by policymakers, businesses, and investors in the coming months will determine whether Nigeria can move from managing economic pressure to unlocking real economic potential. And that's where we leave the conversation for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Jasiri. We're back tomorrow with hot topics.
It's Friday.
All right, have a good one. Bye.